Oh, all right. Welcome to another episode of The Fundable Founder. I'm here today with Bryanne Leeming, founder and CEO of Unruly Studios. Welcome, Bryanne.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've been following your success over the last several years, and I think you have a great story to tell, and you'll be able to provide some advice to our listeners out there about how to successfully raise a first-time fund. So first, why don't you tell us a little bit about your company? What's your elevator pitch?
So I'm the founder and CEO of Unruly Studios. We are an education technology company, and we combine STEM learning, specifically computer science learning, with active play for students in elementary and middle schools. So our first experience is we built a product called Unruly Splats. That's a learning tool. It's a durable device. This is a splat here that lights up, makes sounds, senses when it's stomped on by kids. That's where the active play comes in. And through our app, kids can code their own rules to new active games like relay races, whack-a-mole, dance routines. They change all the colors, sounds, timing, scoring, things like that. And since launching, we're now in hundreds of schools across 49 states and 6 provinces in Canada. And we've had over 1 million stomps on the Unruly Splats.
I love that you're tracking stomps. That's great.
Yes, that is our favorite KPI.
Is your end customer then the school, or is it or are you selling direct B2C as well?
So we are fully just with schools at this point. Yeah.
Great. That's
and customer, so it's K through 8 is the grade levels, public schools mostly in the US and Canada right now.
That's fantastic. So let's go back to deciding to launch this business. What got you into edtech and the splat? What was the real inspiration around this?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that yesterday. Actually, there's so many different things that kind of come to a startup idea, but one of the biggest things for me was that I was very lucky that when I was in 3rd grade, I grew up in New Hampshire. I was exposed to computer science at school playing a game. And that, I didn't really realize at the time, but later in my career, I ended up going into the technology industry, and I felt that really had impacted my own career, that first experience being very positive. And so part of it was really, I studied cognitive science in undergrad. I saw the benefits of mixing STEM and play through that. And I was always an athlete as well. And so kind of incorporating this active play element came in really through that. But I went to business school at Babson, got my MBA. And while I was there, I had the idea for Splats. And part of it also came from my husband. He's a career educator, has been an educator for 12 years, is now an assistant principal. And seeing from his eyes the ed tech industry, working with schools, and how sometimes the technology was sort of taking teachers out of the picture and not really, kind of didn't really realize the realities of teaching. It was almost like they hadn't talked to teachers. And so we've just had this like teacher first mentality from the beginning of we talk to teachers all the time. And that very much came into the design of the program, which is a membership that we include teacher training in it every year, ongoing for all teachers of the school. And that's definitely been a big impact on it. But initially, the idea was really this electronic playground, and started prototyping that in different capacities while at Babson, and put together the early team, which was made up of Amon Milner from the MIT Media Lab and Olin College. And he was part of the early Scratch team, and then building a coding language, and then ultimately brought on others from Nickelodeon, Disney, Mattel, iRobot to help build this vision out of breaking down the barriers for STEM education. So from there, we launched the product on Kickstarter, and ultimately we raised about $4 million over the years now as part of our seed round. And we work with investors from Learn Launch locally, Techstars, as well as the Amazon Alexa Fund, and AT&T have joined as well. So it's been a great journey so far.
That's fantastic. So let's unpack that a little bit. Well, so let's, go back, and you mentioned that one of the first things you did, you started building your team and started building a little bit of the product. How far did you feel like you needed to progress before you actually went and did a Kickstarter campaign? What were the goals you wanted to achieve before going to Kickstarter?
Yeah, there was actually a lot I found that we could do with almost no funding in the beginning. And there was a lot of like kind of trial and error. We were, paying for basically we were building prototypes with as little funding as possible,
Yeah.
working with a team that was really in it for the right reasons, that wanted to join, wanted to get this done, wasn't really, no one was really getting paid at that point. And then we were really trying to test the experience so that we knew what we needed to build to be engaging for kids, parents, educators. So we tested with about 3,000 kids, parents, and educators over that course at different public events at the Boston Children's Museum,
Yep.
places like that. And so we really tested the experience. We knew what they wanted. And then we got to the point where we knew what we had to manufacture and how much it was going to take, how long, who we were going to work with, and who was going to build the software. As soon as we had all of that, we were ready for Kickstarter to kind of estimate the timing and things and get that early market demand and really test that out.
How did you
We raised
convince
a little bit before the
okay.
yeah.
How did you convince the parents and the schools and Boston Children's Museum to let you test this out with their children?
Well, the Boston Children's Museum, we did this maker fair with them, and we just met someone over there that loved the concept of mixing STEM and play, obviously being such a great organization for play. They were really excited. And so they were willing to let us come in their test kitchen and almost come in on a Saturday and let parents come through and try it out. So it was just really people that believed in the mission and what we were trying to do at the beginning. And we kept in touch with everybody. So as we've grown, we've continued to, tell them the news, like bring them along for the journey. And so building that early community from the early days was what led to our successful Kickstarter and sort of was very much part of the journey too.
So let's talk a little bit about Kickstarter. Any piece of advice for running a successful Kickstarter campaign for people out there?
Oh yeah, I mean, just what I said is around like building the early community before Kickstarter. Like, don't just put it up and expect people to come, but really building that campaign momentum before, during, after, keeping them along for the journey, including your audience in key decisions about the product, and really just kind of listening to the people who are backing you. That was a big one for us. But yeah, I think the momentum is the biggest one for Kickstarter.
So did you have a lot of those 3,000 kids you tested the product with? Did they become the people who bought Splats via Kickstarter?
Yeah, a lot of them did. We started to recognize on the backer list that we would say, oh, we remember meeting them at the New York Maker Fair or like places like that, but they were total strangers to us before that. So yeah, that was exciting. I do remember the moment when the first, of course, your friends and family kind of that first day are helping, putting in, but then the first person we saw on the list that none of us recognized, and we were so excited. We're like, this the first stranger has bought this online. This is great. And then like 300 more bought it that we didn't know. So
that's awesome. And so the Kickstarter campaign got you more runway. What were the things you wanted to achieve before you decided to go out and raise like a real round of capital?
So we actually were kind of starting to raise before the Kickstarter. And a lot of the investors we met in that lead up to the Kickstarter, as soon as they saw the Kickstarter be successful, it was almost like a great early market demand validation. And then we had an open round, a convertible note during and after the Kickstarter. So we started getting investment pretty much right after that as well. So we had a little bit come in before, which was helped us promote the campaign and things like that and start the manufacturing process. And then we had a lot kind of join right after because they had seen what, the full story put out on Kickstarter is really helpful, telling your story in a very simple way. And that's a helpful tip for fundraising too. And then, and then that was kind of how we got that early traction for that first pre-seed round.
How did you go about finding those first pre-seed investors? What was your strategy? What was the story you told? Who did you go out to?
Yeah, so I was a first-time founder, and I also myself am not a technical founder. And so, building a hardware and software product is very hard. And so it was going to take a lot of proof points to pull in these early investors for us. So The first ones that we met, I worked while I was in school with Rough Draft Ventures out of General Catalyst. So they were our first official investor. And then a lot of it was just taking meetings over that time while we were building the product and keeping the momentum going with investors and building relationships. So I would take a coffee meeting maybe 6 months before the Kickstarter and tell them what we were doing and what our plans were and what our goals were, what the milestones were. And then I had an email list and I would email investors around once a month, once every 2 months, which I still do to this day,
Yep.
and just kind of tell them our traction, what had happened, how close we were to the milestones, big milestones we hit, and also challenges we were facing, because I think it's a reality that you're not, not everything's easy in the early days. And so they were actually a great source of help at the early days too, when we did hit challenges and roadblocks. So just really building relationships and continuing to update them was a big success for us.
Yeah, you're not just building relationships, you're building trust, right? Like you're an unknown quantity to them, right? You're a first-time founder, and you're really trying to build that level of trust that, if they make an investment in you and your team, that, you're going to do whatever it takes to try to turn this into a really great business, and acknowledge that you don't know everything along the way and you're going to make mistakes, but that you have a plan, and you're starting to execute on that plan, and that just builds that trust. And did you reach out to those early investors? Were these cold emails? Were they calls? Like, how did you reach out to General Catalyst and maybe some of the angel investors?
Yeah, a lot of them were warm introductions just through kind of meeting people. I would tell them what we were up to. Someone at Babson, because so Rough Draft Ventures invests in student founders. So it was a student at Babson I met who told me about it and then introduced me to the fund. But for others, it was I did a few accelerator programs, and they were really helpful at building my own network. Pre starting Unruly, I had really didn't have a network of investors at all, and so it was my first time, and so got to meet a lot of people through mentors at those programs who were willing to make introductions. So the Win Lab at Babson was one of the ones I did, and then Learn Launch, and those led to one of the angel groups that I met was through a connection from one of the accelerators. So a lot of that, I'm trying to think if I've ever cold emailed and had that work. Sometimes there was a fund I wanted to meet, and so I would go through a friend who I saw maybe knew them and get an intro. So it was rather cold, but tried to at least get an intro from someone. And so, yeah.
That's great. And any advice, any lessons learned from that initial fundraise? Even things looking back, you're like, well, that was a mistake to do X, Y, and Z, or to spend so much time on this. What are your words of wisdom?
I think if I learned anything from the early days, I was talking to literally anyone that I could get a meeting with. And I was doing a lot of outreach and kind of taking every meeting I could. And while that was helpful in building the network, I think that, knowing what stage you're at and what stage the investor invests in, that probably would have saved us some time, because sometimes we were talking to much further along kind of investment firms when we were really early. And so while I did get really good advice from those conversations, so maybe it was helpful, but it wasn't necessarily going to lead to funding right away.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing was just building the relationships over time. The whole investors invest in lines, not dots, is one of my favorite things that I learned. And it was just all about kind of keeping the momentum, building that trust, like you said, and just kind of keeping on with what milestones we wanted to hit and when we hit them, and just showing that we had a team that was capable of doing this really hard thing, which was bringing a hardware software product to market and selling it to the education space. So
it is, a lot of investors, avoid investing in companies where it's complicated like that, where there is hardware and software. And so, what did you do to overcome that? Right. So you're in edtech, this hardware software play. It's a tough story to tell. So what were some of your strategies for overcoming that?
My strategy that I kind of figured out at some point was just looking at our data and being able to really understand our data, know our numbers, know my projections front and back. I make them all, work with my finance team, but I make them and know them very well. And being able to tell the story with numbers was really helpful. So
it's really
I
hard
think
for investors to argue with numbers, right?
yeah. And honestly, what I do at this point, because we are a hardware software company, but we have a SaaS model, is that I'm really looking at benchmarks in SaaS and ignoring the fact that we have hardware. And I'm able to show our growth relative to a SaaS company, and really kind of that's where we're excelling. And so kind of taking benchmarks, but also like driving our KPIs off of successful business models we've seen before. And that's been really helpful, is sort of seeing the traction with data, with numbers, with usage from, usage to revenue, all that kind of, those kind
and
of.
stomps. Don't forget stomps.
Yeah, my favorite.
Were there any mentors along the way, or people who gave you really good advice, and maybe what that advice was?
Yes, I thought of two. So one was Mike Troiano, who was part of he was a judge in a competition I was part of very early on. And he's the one that told me the investors invest in lines, not dots, because I would see him at events over time, and we would have always made like a lot of progress. And he was like, this is what I'm talking about, like investors invest in lines, not dots. So that was a really good one. The other one was he was a Olin College professor, Keith Hopper, who told me that as we were going through the fundraise, kind of around the area of momentum, but he called it an air of inevitability, which I loved and I still love. And I use it with my team a lot now too, even just with like some of the initiatives we're doing internally, but just having this air of inevitability, like we're moving. You can come with us or not, but like this is all about like this train's moving anyway. And that's kind of how we did the Kickstarter and how we did everything from there on. And I thought it was really good advice. I don't know where that came from, but I love that word.
That's great. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. Thank you to Keith Hopper.
And then, you've gone on to raise even more capital since then, right? I mean, did the fundraising, has it just been continuous this whole time? Like, how do you balance running your business with fundraising?
It's always hard to optimize, like prioritize your time around because there's two very big things going on. You're making sure the business has capital to get to the next milestones. You're also running a business, and we have 15 employees now, so it's a lot. But yeah, I feel like they always say like you never stop fundraising, and I think that's true. You're always kind of building your network, building your relationships, and also building the story that you're about to, that you're going to, like with what we're focused on right now. We had just finished a round in January, and we're super focused on our sales metrics, but that's very much part of, our next fundraise as well. So it's all kind of related.
And you're still sending those monthly updates, I know, because I get them.
Yes, we are still sending the monthly updates, and they're so helpful. Yeah, because we always get great advice from those, and it keeps us in touch with our kind of followers as well. Yeah.
And as a first-time founder, how did you educate yourself on what VCs and angels were looking for, like in order to position yourself to tell a story that they wanted to hear? Yeah,
that was definitely a moment. I had to realize there was sort of this language around, how to talk about, the growth and things that I had to learn. And I think some of it came from the accelerator programs were really helpful. Mentors who would take the time and look through our deck and give me really honest feedback, and being willing to be, coachable and take that honest feedback and kind of learn from what worked. That was a big piece of it. I can think of.
That's great. Yeah. So this has been tremendous advice, and love listening to your story. I do like to end with one question though, and that's, how would you describe yourself in one word?
I had a best friend that always described me as fearless, so I'll go with that.
I like that. And it's our best friends that know us even better than we know ourselves. So we'll end on that note. Thank you so much, Bryanne. Looking forward to watching your success going forward. I'm a huge fan of yours.
To innovate, invent, and disrupt, we're your partner to fuel your growth. Contact us to learn more.